Alrighty, so we are in First Samuel. This is lesson 2A. So we're doing an overview of 4, 5, and 6, and we're gonna do the details of chapter 4. So just coming out of chapter 3, we got to where we saw here that Samuel was ministering to the Lord before Eli, and that a word from the Lord was rare in these days and visions were infrequent. However, we see Samuel getting a word from the Lord, and it was against Eli. And Eli had already had a word from the Lord, from the man of God. Uh, so um, we saw that in our last lesson. So Samuel confirms the word from the man of God, and Eli accepted it. He said, "It is the Lord, let him do what seems good to him." And we see Samuel confirmed as a prophet of the Lord. And we talked about that as far as what is a true prophet. So heading into chapter 4, verse 1, it says, "Thus the word of Samuel came to all Israel." So in chapter 3, it was at the end of it. Let's see. In verse 19, it says, "Thus Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fail." So all the words that God spoke to Samuel were true and right. He let none of his words fail. Samuel's words fail. The word of Samuel came to all of Israel. The word of the Lord through Samuel came to all of Israel. Samuel's confirmed as a prophet, a true prophet of God, and we also see Samuel rising up as judge. Um, so now all Israel went out to meet the Philistines in battle and camped beside Ebenezer while the Philistines camped in Aphek. The Philistines drew up in battle array to meet Israel. When the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the battlefield. When the people came into the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us take to ourselves from Shiloh the ark of the covenant of the Lord, that it may come among us and deliver us from the power of our enemies." So the people went to Shiloh, and from there they carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who sits above the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. Well, what went wrong here? um, so we see that the Philistines, so we see Israel went out to meet the Philistines in battle, and she took us through some verses. As far as the Philistines, Genesis tells us that verse 14 was the first mention. Genesis tells us they were descendants of Ham and not native to the land of Canaan. Um, in Genesis 21, we saw that when Abraham was walking the land that, or sojourning through the land that God had promised his descendants, he came across, or he had a run in, so to speak, with Abimelech. Abimelech saw that Abraham, that God was prospering Abraham, and that he could potentially be a threat. Abraham had, whenever Lot was taken captive by those 5 Assyrian kings, Abraham had 318 fighting men in his own house. So he had his own army. So he's very rich, very prosperous, had his own army. And Abimelech came out to make a covenant with him, and the covenant was that they would not do each other harm, that they would live in harmony. And part of that covenant was it included a well that Abraham had dug. And you see he traded some sheep for the well, and things like that. So you see dealings with Abimelech, and that was also extended. So whenever Isaac was sojourning through the land, same thing. Uh, he actually, the whole account was, he told his wife to say that she was his sister, and Abimelech saw that he had lied, and but then they ended up confirming a covenant at the end of that whole ordeal, and Isaac sojourned through the land in peace with the Philistines. But by the time we get to Exodus, whenever they're coming out of Egypt, the Philistines are enemies to Israel. So we see here that whenever they were first out of Egypt, the Lord led them away from the Philistines so they would not change their minds and return to Egypt if they saw war. Also in Exodus, they were told to drive out the people of the land of Canaan, lest they, you know, those people lead them into sin. They were also not supposed to intermarry with them, and we see with Samson that he did just that. Joshua, we see that he had still not driven out the Philistines by says that he was very old and he had still not driven them out. In Judges, we see that the people of Israel sinned by bowing down to the gods of the Philistines and many others. So they were told to drive everybody out. They were told not to intermarry. They were told not to bow down to their gods. And the driving them out and not intermarrying was so they wouldn't be unequally yoked, and so they wouldn't end up being captured into sin by those practices, and by bowing down to other gods, and they didn't listen, and that's what they did. So Judges tells us that Samson takes a wife from the Philistines, and also that the Lord was seeking an occasion against the Philistines who were ruling over Israel. Then we see in Judges 16, after the incident with Delilah and he gets captured by the Philistines, which I really don't understand that one, because I was reading through that this morning, and 3 times he lied to her about his strength, and 3 times she had the Philistines at the door to capture him, and then he ends up telling her where his true strength came from. I just really don't understand that one. But anyway, he told her, she orchestrated his capture, and we have the story, or the account of him taking down the house of Dagon, or the Philistines, and killing the lords of the Philistines and many people. So when we hit Samuel, we see in the period of the Judges, we see the Philistines are enemies of Israel, and we're coming out of the period of Judges into the Kings, and the Philistines are going to be pretty integral in this whole account. This article, Who Were the Philistines, from Got Questions, is a pretty interesting read, and it gives you cross references. It also talks about how during the reign of King David and Solomon, they really just were no more. It just kind of petered out and were no longer a people. So here we are. We're in battle. They killed about 4,000 men on the field. And so the first problem that we have here is the question of, why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Instead of looking at looking at themselves, the attitude here is just expecting the Lord to be, for lack of a better term, kind of their Santa Claus, just to give them whatever they want in spite of uh, what they were doing, in spite of whether or not they were keeping covenant by not worshiping other gods. At this time in history, Israel was under a conditional covenant that they made with God at the base of Mount Sinai, and that covenant was reinstated before they entered the promised land. So your law, the law is their covenant contract, and it's a conditional covenant in Deuteronomy 28 through 30. He states, if you do these things, I will bless you. If you don't do these things, I will curse you. So whenever God brings an enemy up against Israel and you see Israel defeated, it's because he's trying to turn them to repentance. Um, because he wishes for no man to perish. We've talked about this before, as far as whenever he brings about judgment, it's not just to zap people and get revenge and all that kind of stuff. The end goal here is repentance. So he's sending a message here, but they're not understanding it. They're just like, well, why has he defeated us? And instead of like, well, yeah, he's not going to be for me because I'm against him by doing these things. So instead of looking internally, the attitude here is blaming God instead of themselves. So and then it just goes from bad to worse. So let us take for ourselves from Shiloh the ark of the covenant of the Lord, that it may come among us and deliver us from the power of our enemies. So instead of looking internally, like um like we should do whenever we have trial or tribulation, instead of looking at am I in sin? What does the Lord want me to learn from this? I am not saying that all trials and tribulations have to do with the fact that you've sinned and God is trying to do something to you. That's not the case always. But we always need to look at that. Um, and we look at the account of Job, where all these things happened to Job, but Job was a righteous man. And he kept, his friends were just, like, oh, you must have sinned, you must have done this, you must have done this. And he said, no, I know my Redeemer lives. He stood on the promise of Messiah. So whenever we're looking at trials and tribulations and things like that, you always want to look at, is God trying to get my attention about something that I've been ignoring? If not, then what does he want me to learn from this? How is he trying to grow me? In this case, they were overlooking their own sin. And so the Lord handed them over to the Philistines in battle. And then it goes from bad to worse, because instead of going to the Lord and turning and repenting and bowing the knee to him, they take the Ark of the Covenant and use it like as a talisman, that, oh, the Ark's going to protect us. And so whenever you look at the Ark of the Covenant and what it was, I have some articles in here, and you can see there's the ark, there's the cherubim there. And so in Exodus we see that the Lord instructed Moses whenever he gave him the instructions for the tabernacle and all the articles in the tabernacle, and he gave him the instructions for the building of the Ark of the Covenant. And there was an atoning cover or a seat on it. And the picture there was atonement, and then therefore it was a picture of the atonement of Christ. This is also God's throne. So whenever the Shekinah glory filled the tabernacle, that's where it sat. So the Ark of the Covenant signifies God's throne and and the mercy seat. And so there's pictures here. And last time we talked about don't mess with God's pictures. So we have basically they just decided to take God's throne out of the tabernacle, and kind of use it as a talisman. Now there was some history behind this, as far as we see in Numbers that the ark led the people, um, whenever they would move the tabernacle, wherever the Shekinah glory led, that's where they would go. We also see that God, via the ark, whenever they were going into the promised land, led them through the Jordan. The waters were at flood level stage, and he orchestrated that to where the waters receded, and they were able to walk through the Jordan. So also we see that at the Battle of Jericho, the ark was involved. And so they're looking at this historically like, oh yeah, the ark, and using it as a talisman, instead of seeing that it was God. It was God. The picture is God on his throne. He is sovereign and he is leading. And then there's also the picture of the mercy seat that we don't want destroyed. So this is just not good. And we see Hophni and Phinehas were right there with the ark. They thought this is a good idea too, and so they're priests of God, and basically profaning the holy. That's what blasphemy is profaning the holy, making common the holy. So they've just taken this thing that is supposed to be holy to them and have profaned it by making it just a common talisman or idol. So paragraph theme is the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord God taken to Ebenezer to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines, accompanied by Hophni and Phinehas. So it's just kind of more confirmation. I mean, we did see Eli said something to them in previous chapters, but it fell on deaf ears. And we know God prophesied what was going to happen to him because he's omniscient and he knows hearts. So in verse 5, as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted with a great shout, so that the earth resounded. When the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, what does this noise of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean? And then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp. The Philistines were afraid, for they said, God has come into the camp. And they said, woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us, who shall deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods who smote the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. Take courage and be men, O Philistines, or you will become slaves to the Hebrews, as they have been slaves to you. Therefore, be men and fight. So there's a huge contrast here. And it goes back to chapter 1. Hannah, her enemy, Peninnah, was torturing her, and she went straight to God. And the battle was his, and we saw how he settled things between them. Here we see they don't go straight to God. They go straight to an article of God and use it as a talisman. And then we see this contrast here where they have no fear of the Lord, but the Philistines do. And they know the history. And this is like hundreds of years later. And these people um still know the history of what happened to Egypt, how Egypt was plundered. They know about the plagues, they know about Pharaoh's army being drowned in the Red Sea. Like this was common knowledge. And the thing about whenever you go into ancient history and ancient cultures, um, was very different about them from our age. Like in this day and age, we have people who just don't even think there's any God at all, agnostic. But in their day and age, they believed in, well, multiple gods. There were a few accounts. There was one pharaoh in Egypt that believed in one God, but they all believed in something greater than them, as opposed to today. But and it was in battle, if they won that battle, they accredited it to their gods, and it was looked at as the winning side, that their god was stronger than the losing side. And so that's what, they're just freaking out because they've heard these accounts and they're like, we're done for. But they're rallying to fight, so they won't be slaves like they've made the Hebrew slaves um after their battles. So there's a stark contrast here of the Philistines recognizing the power of God, even though they don't say, they say God has come into the camp, but it says, who shall deliver us from the hands of these mighty gods? And so we see that they go back to multiple gods, but still they see the power of the God of Israel, and they're afraid of it. Whereas here we're profaning it. So this one, the Philistines were afraid because God had come into the camp. So all of my paragraph themes as I'm going along are not only kind of telling what happened, but going into the main thing, the plain thing, like what is uh the main message of the author here. So 10 through 11, so the Philistines fought and Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent, and the slaughter was very great. For there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers, and the ark of God was taken, and the two sons of Eli and Hophni and Phinehas died. So we see that that prophecy about Hophni and Phinehas that Eli had gotten, that came true. Both of his sons died on the same day. We see the slaughter was great. And the ark of God was taken. So this is the big thing right here, that the ark of God was taken. And that's what they would do. We saw that whenever we studied Daniel, whenever Nebuchadnezzar conquered, he took articles from the temple of God and put them in the temples of his gods. So that's what those conquering kings would do, is they would take the stuff, articles of the conquered nations gods and put them in the temple of their gods. And so we see the Philistines doing the same things. They captured the ark. They were afraid of it first, but now they captured it. So this is the big thing, and we'll see why in a second. So in 12, now a man of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes torn and dust on his head. And when he came, behold, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road, eagerly watching, because his heart was trembling for the ark of God. Very important. So the man came to tell it in the city, and all the city cried out. When Eli heard the noise of the outcry, he said, "What does the noise of this commotion mean?" Then the man came hurriedly and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set that he could not see. The man said to Eli, "I am the one who came from the battle line. Indeed, I escaped from the battle line today." And he said, "How did things go, my son?" Then the one who brought the news replied, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great slaughter among the people. And your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been taken." When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell off the seat backwards beside the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for he was old and heavy. Thus he judged Israel 40 years. So, that prophecy about his sons was fulfilled, but what the author states here is when he heard about the ark, and we see his the messenger, his heart was trembling for the ark of God. So this is very significant, that the ark of God has been taken, and we'll see why with what Phinehas's wife has said. So we see that Eli is old, he's blind. Says he fell off his seat at the gate. So that's he was a judge at the city gates, and he was old and he was heavy. Remember, God had said that he was getting fat off of what his sons were doing as far as taking the meat and the fat and things like that from the sacrifices. We see that he died, and that's the end of him being a judge of Israel. So he was a judge of Israel for 40 years. So you see this, he repeated the ark of God, the ark of God, the ark of God, in this, and this is really important. And you see these kind of what scared this guy, this messenger. It wasn't that, I mean, yeah, they were defeated, people died, the sons of Eli died, but it was the ark of God. He was trembling because the ark of God had been captured. And we see down here with Phinehas's wife, verse 19, now his daughter-in-law, Phinehas's wife, was pregnant and about to give birth. And when she heard the news that the ark of God was taken, so that's the first thing that was mentioned, and that her father-in-law and her husband had died, she kneeled down and gave birth, for her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the women who stood by her said to her, "Do not be afraid, for you have given birth to a son." But she did not answer or pay attention. And she called the boy Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God was taken, and because of her father-in-law and her husband." And she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God was taken." So I was looking through Farag's notes on this last night, and he was his conclusion was that Phinehas's wife was more than likely a godly woman. And I concur, just that whenever I was going through this myself, I was like, there's something different about her. And it's her, the naming of the son, and the big thing that's coming out of her mouth is the glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God was taken. That's the big thing coming out of her, and she named her son for that. So we see she gets the news. She goes into preterm labor. because of the news, and it leads to her death in after childbirth. She gave birth to a son, but her the big thing coming out of her is the glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. So we see that she took you through the cross references. The Shekinah glory filled the tabernacle and was seated over the Ark of the Covenant. They used the Ark of the Covenant like a talisman, like a good luck charm, to help them. They think that's going to help them defeat the Philistines instead of seeking God. And we see that God hands them over to the Philistines, and the Philistines take the ark, and we see the prophecy fulfilled about Eli and Phineas. We see that Eli's he dies with the news, and that his term of being judge over Israel is finished. He judged for 40 years. And we see his daughter-in-law's reaction. So we see you're seeing these contrasts between godly and ungodly, godly minded and not godly minded, and just kind of bringing it into our day. This applies. This isn't just like, oh, okay, these people did this back then. This applies now. So I think there's things that we can think about that happen in our day, things that we might use as a talisman, so to speak. Oh, I have a well, I mean, just in some of our goofy little stories or things that we come up with, like, I don't know, Dracula and werewolves and stuff like that. For some reason, we think that, a wooden cross or whatever is, you know, going to protect us from things that aren't real. But I mean, that's just a silly story. But there's other things that, you can go into a gift shop, and there's like little angel tokens and things like that that people will buy for each other and give each other. And that token is that's not going to protect you. So there's things that we do today. I really like, if you have a chance to go into Farag's notes, there were some quotes from Charles Spurgeon and a couple other commentators that, we can wear a cross necklace on our chest, or we can make the sign of the cross on our chest, but that's not going to protect us. It's God himself and seeking God himself that is going to protect us. So it's seeking God. It's not an outward symbol or an outward representation. It's a heart, and it's a heart seeking of God. That is what is going to protect you and be with you through all of your trials and tribulations, because they will come. We're told that we will have trials and tribulations in this life. So the main thing about this account is the glory departed from Israel. Why did it depart from Israel? Because um of this right here. At the end of Judges, or maybe it's not the end, I can't remember the verse, but it's in my notes previously. But everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And we see here that they sinned and they bowed down to the gods of the Philistines and many others. And we see here we have priests not, they were profaning God. They weren't godly minded. They were taking advantage of the people. And we also saw some contrast where there were a pocket of godly people that, even though the priests were acting this way, they still worshiped God how God said to worship them, worship him. Leviticus is all about how do you approach a holy God. So they still did those sacrifices, even though the priests were going to take the meat and do bad things and stuff like that. They still trusted God, that they knew that it, they God would honor that, him seeing them keep that picture that's in those sacrifices. And we see here this little pocket, the messenger with, he's more concerned about, he's trembling because of the ark. And then we see Phineas's wife, um and what her big concern is. The other thing is, was it in chapter 3? No, I think it was with the man of God, when he said that it was going to make everyone's ears tingle, what he was going to do. And here we are. And whenever we looked at that word, it wasn't like, ooh, like gossip or anything like that. This was like just full on dread, unbelievable, undescribable. And this is what we see. I mean, it's just dread. We see it in the messenger. We see it. Eli gets the news that the ark has been taken. He falls back and breaks his neck and dies. And then we see Phineas's wife goes into preterm labor, dies in labor, and names her son Ichabod, because the glory has departed for Israel, for the ark of God was taken. So, I mean, God said it, and he did it. God said it, it happened. He said it, it happened. So even in this small instance, and we've studied prophecy before, we've gone through it with Genesis, we've gone through it with Daniel, Ezekiel, Revelation. When there's even some of it whenever we studied the Gospels, we've studied First and Second Thessalonians, and we know whenever God says it, whenever He prophesies something, it happens. And so we know that the things that He's prophesied that haven't happened yet will happen. So those are details for chapter 4, and we'll probably come back to them because it's integral to 5 and 6. But 4 also wraps up. We see chapter 1 with this account of Hannah and Peninnah. And Hannah has an enemy. It's Peninnah. And Hannah goes, we see her heart. She goes straight to the Lord. And through her, the Lord raises up Samuel. And so we see her in chapter 2, we have her prayer of praise and thanksgiving, and her keeping her promise to the Lord, her vow. We also see that the priest over Israel at the time, we see his sons were worthless. Eli being the head and the judge, and his sons Phineas and Hophni, they were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. So we have a contrast there. And then in chapter 3, we see that Samuel hears from the Lord and has a vision, even though those things were scarce during that time of Israel. Why were they scarce in the time of Israel? Because of the things going on that we see in Judges 10, that they were sinning, they were bowing down to other gods and things like that. But we see these little pockets of people, these pockets of righteous people. And so our book theme for First Samuel is God's search for a man after his own heart. And we're seeing who is after God's own heart. And so we see Elkanah. even though he sinned by taking 2 wives, we see that he still goes up yearly to sacrifice to the Lord, that he kept the vow that Hannah made. He could have circumvented her vow by the law as laid out in Leviticus, but he didn't. He kept the vow. Um, we see a woman after God's own heart in Hannah. Now in Eli, it's, it's actually one of those accounts. Was he a righteous man or not? We do see acceptance of what the Lord has said. The Lord said that he put his sons before him. But we also know that there are righteous people like Lot. Lot was considered a righteous man, but he was totally ineffectual in the culture that he was in. Um, and he was a judge at the city gates. So we kind of see, I'm not going to call them gray areas. God knows the heart, but we have these accounts. Saul's going to be one of them. There's always questions. Was Saul saved? So Eli, was he after God's own heart? Um, God says he put his sons before him, but he also accepted God's judgment. And he was affected by hearing about the ark. And then we get down to we see the people of Israel, or the men of Israel that were going up against the Philistines, using profaning the ark of the Lord. And now the Philistines understood this and were afraid. And so we see that contrast there, but they're not after God's own heart. In fact, we see they're diviners saying something later on. And then we get down to Phineas's wife. So now we have another woman after God's own heart. So that's kind of what we're tracing. What does this look like, being after God's own heart? And so right now, what we're seeing is someone who bows the knee to God and who goes straight to God. So it's not using symbols of God as protection or divination or anything like that. It's bowing the knee to him and his precepts and seeking him and him only. So 5 and 6, not going to be as detailed. We'll go over the details in our next lesson, but we're just going to do the overview. So we're going to read through it, do our paragraph themes and our chapter themes. We might clean these up in the next lesson as you go in and kind of do more details and things like that. You kind of end up cleaning things up a bit. So this is just a first take. So now the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. So you're looking at your geography. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. So you're going to want to go in and find out, well, who's this guy? Not real, but you want to find out like what was going on in their culture with this. So when the Ashdodites arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and set him in his place again. But when they arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. Therefore, neither the priest of Dagon nor all who enter Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. So, paragraph theme or paragraph title: the Philistines take the ark to the house of Dagon in Ashdod. Dagon falls on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. 6 through 12. Now the hand of the Lord was heavy on the Ashdodites, and he ravaged them and smote them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territories. When the men of Ashdod said that it was so, they said, "The ark of God of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is severe on us and on Dagon our God." So they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines to them and said, "What shall we do with the ark of God, of the God of Israel?" And they said, "Let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath." And they brought the ark of the God of Israel around. After they had brought it around, the hand of the Lord was against the city with very great confusion, and he smote the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. So they sent the ark of the God to Ekron. And as the ark of the God came to Ekron, the Ekronites cried out, saying, "They have brought the ark of God, of the God of Israel, around to us to kill us and our people." They sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines and said, "Send away the ark of the God of Israel and let it return to its own place, so that it will not kill us and our people." For there was a deadly confusion throughout the city, and the hand of God was very heavy there. And the men who did not die were smitten with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. So, paragraph theme: the hand of God was heavy on the Philistines. And so you see, I'm taking words out of the text whenever I'm uh, coming up with these titles and these themes. So you're going to want to do a little work on, of course, you're looking at your geography. You're going to want to look at Dagon and what's that all about. You're going to want to look at these tumors, do word studies. You might need to go to commentary a little bit on that one, just to see kind of what some people think it possibly could be. Overall chapter theme is God's hand is severe on the Philistines, and I included and Dagon, their little g god. So that sums up chapter 5. Next week we'll get more into the details on this and tie it into chapter 4. So chapter 6, now the ark of the Lord had been in the country of the Philistines 7 months. Note the time. And the Philistines called for the priest and the diviners, saying, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we shall send it to its place." They said, "If you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but you shall surely return to him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not removed from you." Then they said, "What shall be the guilt offering which we shall return to him?" And they said, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For one plague was on all of you and on your lords. So you shall make the likeness of your tumors and the likeness of your mice that ravage the land, and you shall give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will ease his hand from you, your gods, and your land. Why then do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts when he had severely dealt with them? Did they not allow the people to go, and they departed? Now therefore take and prepare a new cart and 2 milch cows on which there was never been a yoke, and hitch the cows to the cart, and take their calves home away from them. Take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart, and put the articles of gold which you return to him as a guilt offering in a box by its side. Then send it away that it may go. Watch if it goes up by the way of its own territory to Beth Shemesh, then he has done us this great evil. But if not, then we will know that it was not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by chance. All very interesting. All some we have extra clues to the plague here, and what could possibly be going on. Um, very interesting account. So the diviners tell the Philistines to give glory to the God of Israel and ease his hand from them, their gods, and their land. So then 10 through 12, then the men did so and took 2 milch cows and hitched them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. They put the ark of the Lord on the cart and the box with the golden mice and the likeness of their tumors. And the cows took the straight way in the direction of Beth Shemesh. They went along the highway, lowing as they went, and did not turn aside to the right or to the left. And the lords of the Philistines followed them to the border of Beth Shemesh. So the men did so and sent the ark to Beth Shemesh. The lords of the Philistines followed the ark to the border. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat and harvest in the valley, and they raised their eyes and saw the ark and were glad to see it. The ark came into the field of Joshua the Beth Shemite and stood there where there was a large stone. And they split the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the box that was with it, in which the articles of gold, and put them on the large stone. And the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrificed sacrifices that day to the Lord. When the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned to Ekron that day. So we'll get into all of this next time, as far as the sacrificing and the burnt offerings, and then this large stone, and but paragraph title: the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrifices to the Lord the day that the ark came. So 17 through 21, these are the golden tumors which the Philistines returned for a guilt offering to the Lord: one for Ashdod, one for Gaza, one for Ashkelon, one for Gath, and one for Ekron. And the golden mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both of fortified cities and of country villages. The large stone on which they set the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua the Beth Shemite. He struck down some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. He struck down all of the people, 50,070 men, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great slaughter. The men of Beth Shemesh said, "Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? And to whom shall he go up from us?" So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, "The Philistines have brought back the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to you." Okay. So we'll get into details. I will tell you, you might want to do some work on this number here, this 50,000 and 70. There seems to be some debate on this. So you might want to look that up. And let's see. I think these Deuteronomy cross references were in the homework for this week, but I put them for this chapter because they gave insight to this chapter, so I'm not going to go over them right now. But it says the Lord struck the people with a great slaughter because they had looked into the ark. Oh yes, these are what was in the ark. So it was the 10 Commandments, the manna, and Aaron's staff, which is lined out in Deuteronomy, and we'll talk more about that later. But it's still profaning the holy. That was supposed to be sealed. Not supposed to go into that, but they did. They just, looked in there. It's like you see them, they're happy, they're sacrificing and things like that. But then some of them look into the ark. So we're gonna pull all this together with 4, 5, and 6 next week. You're gonna want to look into some of the things that I pointed out through here. It's going to be a little bit of research, a little bit of work, And this is going to tie in to our subsequent chapters because we have, um, okay, well, now we're going to be, these things happen to us. Now it's just the sending it along, the things that are happening, um, with, the ark. And the problem is profaning the holy. Um, so chapter theme that I've set for this for right now is who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God. Um, it reminds me of Revelation. It kind of tipped me off that question, who is able to stand, because in Revelation, I think it's chapter 6 or 7, I can't remember right now, but it says they ask, and who is able to stand, hide us from the wrath of the Lamb, who is able to stand, and then the next chapter shows you who is able to stand. So that's a little tip off for lesson 3, but we got to get through lesson 2b right now. So just tracing this back, she did ask you to look at your chart on the period of the judges. We see that Samson there, right there, and Samuel right there. So that's where we are, in that part of history. Samson was that last judge. Eli is out. He had judged for 40 years. And so he's dead now. And so now we're going to see the rise of Samuel. And this is just taking us into, as we go through subsequent chapters, we're going to get into the first earthly king of Israel. We're going to see where they cry for a king. But we're tracing through our chapters who is after God's own heart. So we see Elkanah, even though his walk is, we see a little mess in his walk. And then Hannah, and we see Eli and his sons. We see the kind of a contrast there. Eli kind of is um a mystery in some ways to us, and we see him being ineffectual, just as Lot was in his city. And but we see Samuel grew in stature and favor with the Lord and men. And then we see Samuel being confirmed as prophet to the Lord. And then we see in chapter 4, the men, the men of Israel who are going into battle, not after God's heart. We see the messenger knew the significance of this. Eli knew the significance of this. He fell off his seat and died. We see Phinehas's wife, her concern, and so we see that she understood this. So 5 and 6, we'll talk about this more as far as how it ties in to 4 and the rest of it, and our overall theme, and we'll kind of hash out some of these details, and flesh this out.